Day 11 of the Seeker's Guide to Soul Contact. I will communicate my grievances and let them go. Now, you may have done everything possible to decide to forgive the person who is behind the grievance and have reasoned within yourself that it's best to just let it go and move on. But then the grievance seems to remain. You are left with a type 2 emotional grievance to which your emotional self has attached. Your feeling nature is ignoring the mind and exercising its own power and authority over your life. When your emotional self makes such a stand, you have to speak to it in its own language. It doesn't understand logic or reasoning. It only understands communications with feeling behind them, and the seeker must deal with it in its own language. Now let us go back to the situation with Jill and Joan from a couple days ago. Jill's emotional self felt very warm about the poem she wrote and was devastated when it felt as if Joan attacked it. Jill's mental self tried to reason the hurt away, but the emotional self would just not have it. It wants justice meted out on an emotional level. If justice were up to the emotional self, it would influence Jill to attack Joan on the next encounter and show her how it feels to be criticized unjustly. Here, the mind of the seeker must step in. The solution cannot be left up to the emotional body, or tragedy will be the result. When a grievance is involved, the solution the emotional self comes up with always involves attack and revenge. The mind, using its reasoning powers, can see where the attack approach will lead. Unfortunately, many minds are not clear as to how to proceed to solve the problem. Let us use the mind here and look at the choices Jill has. 1. The mind can acquiesce and let the emotional self have its way. Joan would then attack back and probably destroy the friendship. 2. The mind can refuse to let the emotional self have its way and just continue the relationship as if nothing has happened. This is, of course, taken by most minds, but the problem is that the grievance remains and will cause problems as soon as the mind relaxes its control over the feeling nature. 3. Jill can have a heart-to-heart talk with Joan and communicate as harmlessly as possible the hurt she feels. This third one is the only step that permanently solves the problem, where the problem is centered in the emotional self. Now, the emotional self feels it is communicating the hurt and will be satisfied. The communication could go something like this. Jill says, "You may think this is kind of silly, but you," speaking to Joan, "really hurt my feelings after you read my poem." Joan replies, "Really? I didn't mean to. What did I do?" Jill, "I know you've written a lot of poems, but I have just written that one. That was my first attempt, and I put a lot of heart into it. When I showed it to you, I thought you would see the feeling I attempted to convey and identify with it. Instead, you responded dryly that it was corny. That really hurt my feelings, and it may seem silly, but I just can't shake the hurt." Joan replies, "I didn't realize that was your first poem, or I'd have been more understanding. Yes, the poem did have heart, and it was touching, and by corny, I didn't mean it was bad, but just kind of old-fashioned, and that is sometimes a good thing. I suppose my correcting your English didn't help." Jill responds, And at this point, Jill's emotional self is already feeling much better. I have to admit, that added fuel to the fire. He came across like an old-fashioned schoolmarm reviewing the paper of a failing student. Joan laughs. I can be that way at times. I hope I didn't discourage you from writing more poetry. If that was your first poem, then overall it was really pretty good. The two give each other a hug, and the grievance is completely replaced by warm, loving energy, strengthening the bond beyond what was there before. So what happens if Joan is not so gracious and thinks that Jill is being ridiculous and is offended at the insinuation that she caused the grievance? In this case, Jill can still let go of the grievance because it has been communicated. But Joan's refusal to have empathy and share in the responsibility would cause the energy of the grievance to settle on her own emotional body. She will now bear the burden of the grievance and will have to deal with it. In most cases, this sharing of the grievance will release the one grieved from the negative feeling. But there are exceptions. If the one who is offended is either attached with strong emotional attachment to the grievance or desires, the offender and wants the offender to suffer, then the grievance may remain. The one offended must be willing to forgive and let go after the grievance has been communicated, even if the response generated seems insufficient. Today's assignment: review possible grievances and see if any are active in your mind or emotions. If so, make a plan to communicate that grievance to the person involved at the earliest possible moment and be willing to let it go. Do so in as harmless and loving way as possible. If you cannot find an active grievance, then make up your mind to diffuse any that come along in the future. Think this affirmation to yourself throughout the day. I will diffuse all my grievances through loving and honest communication and pave the way for the light of the soul. Thank you for watching, and be sure and check out my website. There's thousands of free articles there at freeread.com, freeread.com.